Resin printers, they're pretty great, right? Well, they're also mostly all the same, so I get that reviews of yet another sheet-to-box based cookie cutter printer aren't exactly interesting. So I tried to find one that was different, and that is the Anycubic Photon M3 series. The Anycubic machines all use a custom ecosystem. This is the mid-sized, it's pretty large, the M3 Plus. They've also got the base M3, which uses a 4K masking LCD. The M3 Plus uses a 6K one, and the M3 Max uses a massive 13.6-inch 7K screen. The two larger machines, the Plus and the Max, also come with the more interesting features of the series, and that is network connectivity to their Anycubic cloud. It even has a little camera built in, and they both have a resin autofilling module that keeps the resin vat topped up during larger prints. And what's actually a really cool addition is the textured PEI release film in here that promises an easier release of each layer, but also leaves a very satisfying texture on your parts. Also, this M3 Plus is supposed to be insanely fast, being able to print 100 millimeters tall in just 1 hour. That's the sales pitch Anycubic give. So let's take a look at how well all of this actually works out in practice. Right after a message from today's sponsor, Polycam. Polycam is a 3D scanning app for iOS, Android, and the web. Their photo mode only needs the camera on your phone or photos from a DSLR or a drone on the web to capture models of any scale. If your camera can focus it, you can scan it. Scan your lawnmower, scan your church, scan your electronics projects, scan yourself, scan your girlfriend, or scan a pile of rocks if you're into that. It even works surprisingly well on notoriously hard to scan objects like cars. Minus glossy black surfaces, of course, those have zero features anyway. And on iOS devices that have a LiDAR scanner built in, Polycam can use that and give you near instant scans of larger objects too. You can use the scans, of course, to 3D print them directly, but they're also super useful as reference for modeling up new designs. You can save out your scans in a whole host of formats for importing them into anything from Blender to Fusion 360 or directly as a simple STL for your slicer. And if you want to use the models for 3D VFX work, Polycam can also generate ambient occlusion, normal, and roughness maps in addition to the 8K textures. Polycam is super easy to use, but if you can't even be bothered to scan your own stuff, they've got a scan sharing social network built in where you can explore the scans other folks have uploaded and share your own scans with the world. Having a 3D scanner in your pocket is really useful, and if you think so too, give Polycam a try at the link in the description below. Let's start out with the disclaimer. This machine, as well as the wash and cure, was provided free of charge by Anycubic. I do not need to send it back. There were no strings attached as to what or how I should cover the machine, and no money changed hands. Also, there are some other reviews out there on this printer that ignore some rather striking shortcomings in the name of, oh, this was pre-release. I don't really like giving a free pass for those sort of things, and now that the Anycubic M3 series is released and has been shipping for a while, those excuses kind of stop being valid. So, first and foremost, you'd expect a resin printer to produce high detail, crisp parts, and the M3 Plus does that. The 6K screen at a build area of roughly 20 by 12 by 24.5 centimeters tall makes for a pixel size of just 34 microns, which is well on the finer side of what MSLA printers typically give you. But as you can see, there's a bit of an issue with mine, as right as I started printing parts for this review, somehow I guess the print ended up poking a hole through the FEP film. It flooded the screen with resin, of course, and it left a thick baked on layer of crud on the screen. That is unfortunate, especially because during the unboxing live stream I wasn't able to get the included screen protector on without bubbles or trapped dust underneath. So this screen, unfortunately, is ruined. But like I said, you can expect a resin printer to print well. It does that. And it's literally everything else but the prints themselves that differentiate one machine from another. So that's the interesting bits, and that's what we're going to focus this review on. One of the cool features is the vat autofilling function of the M3 Plus and the M3 Max. This actually works way different than what I expected. I thought it was going to be like a dog bowl filler kind of thing where you just stick in your resin bottle upside down, and as air gets to the opening, you know, some resin drains out. But this is way more complex than that. The core piece is this air pump that lives inside the printer. It hooks up to a special resin bottle cap that has these long aluminum studs attached to it on the inside and two hoses and cables on the outside. So what happens is that the air pump actually pressurizes the entire resin bottle. Then, because one of the aluminum studs, larger one, is actually a hollow tube, the resin then gets forced out through that bore, back through the black silicone hose and into the printer, where it gets squirted into the resin vat. The other rod in the bottle, I guess, forms sort of a plate capacitor with the hollow tube, and that would change capacitance as the bottle empties, and of course that would allow the printer to monitor the resin level inside the bottle without any moving parts. In the printer's vat, there's these two prongs that dip down into the resin as you slide in the vat, and those sense the resin fill level in there. Yes, this is a rather complex system, and I have no idea how well it's still going to work a couple months in, but I guess worst case, you know, you replace the silicone tubes and you're up and running again. This actually does a great job of keeping the vat full all the time. Too full, like above the max fill line, which is fine for printing, but as soon as you try to swap resins and have to empty out the vat, you're in trouble. The vat does have a spout back here, but that thing is the worst mimic I've ever seen. It is an absolute trap. So I guess you'd need to use a turkey baster or something to drain off the majority of the resin first, or plan for a resin swap just a couple prints ahead. Turn off the auto refill feature and then run down the resin level on purpose. You can't adjust the resin fill level by, bending and adjusting these fingers, because that would actually prevent you from sliding the vat in and out. But actually you don't even really need the autofill system on a printer this size. If you fill up the vat all the way, that still is enough for any typical print, even when it uses up the maximum build volume. This probably holds a third to half a liter of resin. Then also, with the autofill system, you can only use 1 liter size bottles, and only the exact ones that have this exact height and cap thread. For example, the Seriatech bottles use a larger thread and a larger cap, so you'd have to transfer those into an Anycubic bottle first to use with the autofill system. There's some resin on the table. I'm going to wipe that up real quick. Then the tubing can also really easily get in the way of the lid sensor in the back here all the time. So, overall the autofill system just ends up being more of an annoyance than it helps. On the other side of the Z-axis column, you'll surely have noticed the camera module that's mounted there. This is part of the Anycubic cloud, and the cloud service in its most basic form is actually kind of useful when it works. There are 4 pieces to the cloud printing service. The printer itself, your slicer, which is Anycubic's Photon Workshop, then the Android or iOS app, and the cloud.anycubic.com website, which is completely dysfunctional. It is linked from Photon Workshop, but it's only generating internal server errors once you click past the expired certificate warning. So really, you're forced to use the app because you need that to create a user account and link your printer. All you need to do is to enter that number from the machine to claim a printer for yourself. And then you can remote monitor the printer status and start prints straight from the slicer or from the app. Once you've printed a part, the file then stays available locally on the machine, right there. So you can start printing that again without needing the app. But for new prints, you either start them immediately from the slicer, or you upload the print file to the cloud, and then you have to pull out the app and start it from there. The printer itself doesn't know anything about any files stored in the cloud. This is all still super unfinished, if you couldn't tell already. Privacy policy? we don't need that. And the process of entering the CN number to claim a printer not only straight up just didn't work until the very latest firmware update, which you have to do manually through the USB drive, but it's obviously a huge security risk. Like I said, there's no confirmation whatsoever on the printer itself when somebody's trying to claim it, which gives basically full control over the machine. And once somebody else has registered it, there's no way for you to kick them out or even reclaim it for yourself. Also, my M3 Plus isn't detecting the camera at all, and I don't know if that's a bug with mine specifically or just not supported in firmware yet. There's still a whole lot of work to be done for this to be good. Like I said, it's certainly usable right now, but it is just not what I would consider ready to ship and to put out into the world as a headlining feature of a new machine. And buying stuff now and betting on it to get improved in the future, that is a risky game to play. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time for a cloud service to be announced and hyped up and then just left to wither and eventually break. Another feature that Anycubic are promoting left, right, and center is how fast the M3 Plus is supposed to be. They're claiming 100 millimeters of build height per hour, which is insane. That is twice the speed of the already crazy fast SL1S. The problem is, well, it just doesn't do that. Sure, it has a layer exposure time of 1.5 seconds, that's totally doable and is in fact the default in Photon Workshop, but the peel cycle the printer does and any SLA printer does takes way longer than that and is usually the determining factor for how fast a resin printer produces parts these days. Anycubic give you exactly one slicing profile for the M3 Plus at 50 micron layer height, but it only does 20 millimeters of build height per hour, which is, as you probably figured out, off by a factor of 5 from their claim. So to get to that 100 millimeters per hour, I guess you'd need to do 250 or 300 micron layers, which is way coarser than a filament printer will do. And you'd also need to hand optimize the peel cycle. And even then, it's probably only going to work for a select few models that don't make use of too much of the build area at once. So throwing a claim like that out there and then leaving it to the customer to figure out how to achieve it, that is at least disingenuous. Speaking of Photon Workshop, Anycubic's slicer for their resin printers, well, it's basically Sheet2Box. It doesn't say Sheet2Box anywhere, but it sure looks and feels a lot like Sheet2Box, which is fine, that works, it does everything you need it to, but it's pretty slow to use, especially on more complex models. I've heard that it's supposed to be a fork of an early version of Sheet2Box, which does sound pretty plausible to me. It's also pretty plausible that you should subscribe, but hey, I'm not the boss of you. The M3 Plus and especially the M3 Max are what I'd consider large for a resin printer. And it turns out that large resin printers come with their own set of challenges, like the rather spacious resin vat being hard to handle. Like, resin does slosh around quite a bit in here if it's full. But another challenge, of course, is that you have large parts. The parts you print are big. Yeah, who'd have thought, right? Anycubic do make a matching wash and cure station, and that actually works rather well. The washing action is really good, and they do give you plenty of extra room in the tank so that when you actually dunk in a large part, it doesn't spill over, it doesn't overflow. Of course, I wish the wash and cure did have some sort of a drying feature built in, kind of like the CW1 does, but if you just give parts a minute to evaporate off your solvent naturally, it also totally works. It washes really thoroughly and it cures pretty fast, so this is good. So it's great to see that they've solved that, but something they didn't solve is actually being able to remove parts from the build plate and keeping them in one piece. The M3 series uses a laser-etched aluminum plate, and parts stick to that really well. In fact, too well, and the hollowed-out Mandalorian print over here, with the base that is only filled with support material, got completely obliterated from me trying to remove it. There is a solution for that, and it's a flex bed, which honestly I think is pretty much a necessity and a must-have with these larger printers. Unless you're just printing small stuff anyway, but in that case, why are you getting a large print in the first place? The overall vibe that I'm getting from the Anycubic M3 Plus is that it's trying to solve problems that don't really matter, or does so while creating even more hassle in the process, and It instead ignores the things that would really make for a better experience. Underneath all that, they've hidden a decent resin printer. Anycubic sure know how to make those. But that by itself is nothing special anymore these days. And that brings me to the shout out to my patrons and YouTube members whose support makes it possible for me to produce independent critical reviews like this one, and with that, hopefully encourages manufacturers to actually make better products. Everybody wins. If you want to support the channel, you can do so through YouTube memberships or through Patreon, somewhere here I think. Thank you to everyone who already does, and if you don't know, I also do regular exclusive Q&A hangouts for supporters. But even the small things really help the channel, like sharing this video, leaving it a like, or getting subscribed to the channel. Thank you all for watching, keep on making, and I will see you in the next one.